Welcome to the Simsbury Woman. I'm so excited today that we have a new and exciting guest. I'd like to welcome Betty Hudson to the show. Betty is a two-term state senator from the 33rd District in Connecticut and has a vast knowledge of issues that have faced the state over the last 20 to 30 years. So Betty, thank you so much for being here today and welcome.
My pleasure. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. And as I was explaining to Betty before the show, in trying to do some research about her, I Googled her and came across this fascinating career in politics and a lifetime committed to public service. So I just wanted to start off with, why politics? What brought you into the political circle?
Well, it was accident. I never had any plan to go into politics. And there's so many women who end up in politics. There's something an issue that you stumble into or that you decide to deal with. And I love Shakespeare.
Okay.
And there used to be a Shakespeare in Stratford in Connecticut, and they did all the Shakespeare plays. They're going to apparently try and resurrect that site. I saw that on television recently. So anyway, my son, who was in high school, knows I love Shakespeare, and there were going to be a field trip to go down and see Julius Caesar.
Okay.
And he said, would you like to be a bus mom, a monitor?
Right.
I said, great, I'll go. So I'd love it. And so I go to high school, and all the kids are on the school bus, and the English teachers are waiting, and I'm chatting with them, and I go on the bus, and there is not a seat on the bus. It's full. And two kids in the front seat kind of moved over sideways, and I was sitting sideways on about 6 inches with my knees in the aisle. You know how it is. And I'm having a fit because we're going to go on the highway. And I always buckle in, and I'm saying, and then it got really anxious because the other bus driver, there were two buses, she pulls alongside my bus driver, and she puts her window down and says, I'm going slow with this mom. So that was reassuring, right?
Okay.
So off we go, and I'm thinking, my God. But I wouldn't embarrass my son. I wouldn't say, like this bus isn't safe, stops, never mind on the road. I would not do that. So down we went, and we got back safe and sound. Good time.
Good.
And I thought, Jesus, I shouldn't do this because it's dangerous. So I said I'd call a school bus demonstration. I never attack anybody because most people are really doing the best they can, and they're well motivated and well intended, and when things happen, it's just not on purpose to do something wrong.
Right.
Right? Right. So I said, they just don't know that, there's too many people on this bus.
Right.
It says, so I said to the bus driver as we were going, are you really taking us this? And she said, points to a sign, and it said 66. And I said, there's got to be 100 on this bus.
Oh, my.
So I count, and no, we had 62. We were 4 short.
So you staged a demonstration?
Yes.
Good for you.
It was the day George Wallace got shot, and we were competing for newspaper stuff. I'm sorry he got shot, but anyway.
And that was your first foray into...
Well, what happened was I decided to call the school bus demonstration, and I got to know about buses. You do these things quite accidentally, you understand.
I do.
And I found out that the school bus seat was 39 inches across, and the aisle was 12 inches. And people started picking up my story, and then the school bus people, the Bluebird bus people and Thomas Bus, they invited me to North Carolina to see their plant, to look at their buses. It got going here, big time. And then I decided I'd have my bus demonstration. So I went to the hardware stores where they used to give these yardsticks out, and with their names on it. And I said I needed yardsticks. I wanted to cut them into 13-inch sections. That's what a seat is.
Right.
3 of them, 39.
Right.
And I had these. They gave them to me, and my husband and I cut up the yardsticks to 13 inches, and I had these 2 shopping bags filled with 13-inch sticks.
And you had a perfect visual.
And I said, Madison Mother wages war on school buses.
And there it is.
There it is. And I said, and then it was fortunate because it did require legislation. It was a regulation. And I said it should be 2 to a seat, 7th grade and above. I mean, kids get big. My son was 6 feet. He was a football player. And the little kindergarten kids, you could put 3 on. I wasn't out to, But it was going to cost more money. Of course, the bus people loved it. They gave me a bus just like that. So anyway, that was, and I thought, gee, that was easy. And that was pretty good, I thought that was an easy thing to do. And then the next thing I did was I got very interested in language. And I love language and the use of it and how it reflects who we are and the power of language. And particularly the power of language to keep people invisible. And women were not part of the language. All the genders were male. And you wouldn't think if you looked at the state statute that we had a woman at all.
Right.
So I decided that we should change language, and I went before my first select. We had 3 women. We had a 5-member board of selectmen, and we had a first select woman.
Wow.
And Abigail was on the board as select.
And what year was this?
71 or 72, maybe 73. I'm in the 70s, early
Wow.
70s. So, see, I go back a long way here. We're talking almost 40 years now.
Right. So this was kind of at the peak of the women's rights
Well, it just
movement.
started, and then the Feminine Mystique came out with Betty Friedan's book and things like that. But what astonished me is how women were their own worst enemy. Because when I said to the Board of Selectmen, I think that language ought to reflect its time, and we couldn't vote, we couldn't hold office, and now we do both, and our language doesn't reflect that change.
Right.
I think it's important that it should, because young girls should know that politics is available to them, that they're not, kids can be cruel. I mean,
Yes.
if you play with a truck and you're a girl, they think, what's wrong with you?
Yes.
You girls don't do that.
Right.
And I didn't want them saying girls don't belong in politics, because we sure do.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to get that message out early, that politics was for women too, and that our language should reflect the reality that we're there.
So another impetus for you to run.
Right. Well, I didn't think anything about running then at all. No, I still didn't. Had no one desire to run at all. No. And then apparently Abigail, whom I mentioned, was on the. She was no help at all when I went to change this. She said she didn't care what we called her as long as she spelled her name right.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't get any support from women, and the newspapers were awful. They said I was making mountains out of molehills, and all the men got involved. I thought, gee, that's really interesting. Why the heck do they care? I mean, I didn't say select person. I could see where a male select man would be upset.
Right.
I don't want to be a person.
Right.
But they all got on the jumping on. I said, gee, I really hit a nerve, and I knew that I was really talking about more than a title.
Yes.
I was talking about power.
Yes.
And we're
Yes.
going to be on their playing field, and they don't want us there. So that was an eye opener. So anyhow, I pursued it, and I got someone to introduce a bill in the legislature. I was not a legislator. I was a homemaker, a stay-at-home mom. And I said, who am I going to get? And I got Bruce Morris from New Haven, who was a black man, and who understood the power of language. When you're 50 and they call you boy, and
Yes.
I mean, you can really do a job on people. Language is very powerful.
It is indeed.
And when they say sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, words will kill you. And it's very unfortunate, but it's true. So I got involved in language. And Abigail left. She had a personal business, and there was a vacancy on the Board of Selectmen. And so my town committee chair asked me if I wanted to fill it, and I said, well, not really. I mean, did you ask all the men? First, I'm sure he asked all the men. I said, and he did, nobody wanted it. He said, no, nobody wants it.
Oh.
So I said, well, okay.
And you took it.
Well, it wasn't that easy. They wouldn't seat me.
Never is.
Well, I just couldn't believe it. So I get to the meeting, and they're going to nominate me, and he said nobody wanted it, and they put another person's name in.
Oh.
I was new. I was only 2 years in Madison. I was new and new to everything. And didn't realize until I looked back on it years later that I was really being used by the town committee, that they didn't want this woman. She's very nice, Harriet Hofrichter. She was in Madison for years. She was chair of the Board of Education, and her group put her name in.
I see.
You see. But what happened when they took the vote, because now I had a competition, it was 2020. There were 40 people there.
Oh.
And I got my 20 from my side, and she got her 20. And the chairman of the town committee said that they could vote twice if there was a tie. Well, he had asked me to be on it.
Oh.
So he voted twice, and I got the nomination.
Oh, wow.
So the Board of Selectmen didn't want to seat me. I don't know why they didn't want to seat me. I didn't do anything particularly terrible. But anyway, they refused to seat me. And
so that was your first step, though, when...
Well, it was a battle. And, it's got me ready to realize that, if you want something, you have to persevere.
Yes.
And you should always be respectful and don't attack people. And I've said this to everybody that wants to make change. If you are right and your cause is just and you persevere, you will win, always.
Absolutely.
Always.
I believe it.
Yes.
I believe it. That's good advice.
Yes, that's what I tell them. So I did ultimately get seated, and that's how it all started. And then then we had an incumbent state senator from my district, Phil Costello, very nice person, Harvard, Yale lawyer, funny man, great sense of humor, great cartoonist. And I just felt I could win. I just had this feeling that this is my time to run for the state senate. And
were there kind of chinks in the armor, so to speak? Were there certain issues that you felt at the time needed to be addressed and would help you win that election?
Sure, because there are women's issues, and he was not a women's senator. There was choice issues, things like that, and he was sort of complacent. And Ella Grasso was running. So I said, "This is my chance. I'll go in on her skirts, and people know me because of all these various things that I've done. And it's not like I was an unknown person. And Madison was the biggest of my 12 towns in that 33rd district.
Got it.
And I figured if I could get him on the beaches, which is Madison. That's what Churchill said. Get him on the beaches. Yes. So I said, if I can, get enough votes in Madison, I'll carry the rest of the towns, which is exactly what happened. And so I won.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it was fun.
Good for you. And in your win, you became an inadvertent pioneer for women in the legislature. So when you went up to the Capitol. What was that like? What was the culture for you as a woman?
Well, it was interesting. When I first went up to the Capitol, I now had the nomination. They all had the 36 candidates for that election, and they'd go around and saying who would win. Like the first was Hartford, you're going to win, all the way down. And they got to the 33rd, and they said, impossible. I was running against Phil Costello, whom everybody adored because he was really very personable. And they said, you'll never win. And I said, well, I'm going to win. And I did win. And that surprised everybody. But that's because, and Ella Grasso certainly helped me. I mean, I had my own strengths, but she certainly helped. So the next election, I ran for re-election. They didn't think I'd ever get back.
And you did.
And I did. Because I had 2 years to build a reputation, which I had a lot of fun doing, by the way.
Well, it was such a critical time period for women and issues that were important to women at that time. And particularly with a woman as governor, which was groundbreaking in and of itself. I mean, what an amazing time to be affecting that change. It's just such an amazing story. So how were you treated? What was the Capitol like?
The Capitol was great. The guys were great. I mean, first of all, I mean, if you're going to be successful in politics, you cannot do anything alone. I mean, you just can't. So you really have to be a people person. And I always say, you have to be liked. You have to be likable. And I don't know how you define that, but, if you look at our elected officials in Simsbury, like Mary Glassman and Linda Schofield and John Hampton, you would say that they were liked. People like them because they're not going to vote for you if they don't like you. I don't care how smart you are, whatever you do. If you're not likable, forget it. So, and being likable means that they'll do things for you because they like you. I didn't come from the House in the lower chamber. I went from the House with a small H, my house, to the state Senate with a big S.
That's
and I didn't have
step.
any connections in the lower chamber at all. So when I had my controversial bills, which were plenty, I would send my buddies from from the Senate. I'd say, oh, God, would you go down and, see if you can get my bill down there and, get me some support, which they would do. I mean, I had, and I had bills that were women's bills. They were shelters for battered women and Medicaid funding for abortion. Gay rights was another really important issue. I got, when I got elected to the state Senate, they assign you committees. And I got assigned 2 committees. Human Services, which they always give to women. I said, oh, God. I'm in a district which is all environmental, the Connecticut River Valley and all. That's where Phil was head of the Environment Committee.
Oh, and you got Human Services.
Right, the cities, Bridgeport, New Haven, Harvard. I said, they'll kill me. I'll never get back in. My constituents don't care about the cities and minorities and all that stuff. And I thought, you guys, they wanted him back is what I felt. And they made sure that they gave me something that, I don't know. They wouldn't give the guys the cities. There's too much work. They don't, my generation, I'm speaking for myself now, they weren't very interested in doing much work. I'll tell you that right now. So they gave me 2 committees. They gave me Human Services, and then they gave me Human Rights and Opportunities, which is all civil and constitutional law, which was very interesting.
Perfect for you.
It was perfect for me. But at the time, I thought, gee, this is interesting. I mean, I've never known anybody to have 2 committee chairs. I mean, it's overwhelming. The workload is impossible. And I realized later that really they were angry at the man who had a Human Rights and Opportunities. He didn't go along, and they took the chairmanship away from him and gave it to me.
Oh.
I found that out much later. But I was overworked because of that. On the other hand, it gave me constant press.
Yes.
All the time. Because all
Especially
the
at that
issues of the
time.
day,
Right.
the women's issues came out of Human Services, and all the constitutional issues that were, really on the forefront
Right.
of understanding that our Constitution treats all citizens the same, and you can't legislate on the basis of class. In other words, you can't say, well, people with blue eyes can't rent
Right.
or can't go into a restaurant, which is what they were doing with gay people. They were saying, there was discrimination. If you were gay, you couldn't get a house, employment, public accommodations. It was really rotten. And if you were a bad tenant, gay, straight, black, white, it makes no difference. You didn't pay your rent or you destroyed property, the lease was no good. You could be evicted. And everybody should be judged as an individual.
Right.
And that was really, and I would learn that as I sat chairing all these committees and having people come before me saying, the law had to be changed because our Constitution isn't being.
And that wasn't necessarily public thought, or the consensus of public thought at the time either, which makes that even more groundbreaking and more of a benchmark for future legislation.
Absolutely, because people's prejudices, they don't even know they're prejudices. It's just the way it always is, and they don't realize the harm that they're doing. Because, people, it's very hurtful when you're not treated as a full citizen and you don't have the rights everybody else has. And you're a perfectly good person.
Right.
Perfectly moral and a good citizen, and you vote and you work and you pay taxes, and yet somehow you're looked down upon, and that's not right.
No. Now, if you could pick one issue at the time that you think was kind of the shining star of your work at the Capitol, what would that be?
Well, the one that brought the most controversy was Medicaid funding for abortion.
That was one of the issues
It was huge.
Yes.
Absolutely huge. And Ella Grasso, whom I liked a lot, but we banged heads, but we had enormous respect for each other. Actually, when I left the Senate, she asked me to work for her, even though we were at each other's throats most of the time. But I brought the bill out and on the basis that it was not an abortion bill, Medicaid. What we were talking about was equal access to health care. And if the rich and the middle class could have a safe, legal abortion, because it was a legal medical procedure at that time, it still is, that the poor shouldn't have to use a coat hanger. I mean, I thought that was abhorrent. And so I brought the bill out, and Governor Grasso would not sign it. She would not be a party to killing the children of the poor. That was the way she felt about it. And so it never took off. I mean, I did, by the way, get it through the Senate, which nobody could even believe I would get that support. But that was the end of it, and it never passed the House. I mean, she died, and Bill O'Neill, and it just never did. But what happened was, because it was a constitutional issue, really, equal protection, it went to the courts. And the courts decided that they were entitled to Medicaid on the basis of my argument, which other people had too, I'm sure. But, they did. And so that was all the headlines. And I would say, abortion's not between a woman and her governor, it's between a woman and her doctor. That made big headlines, of course. So all of these things made me pretty prominent. But that was the one that really, I think, it affected a lot of people.
Yes, yes.
And but a lot of the stuff I brought out were my most favorite bill. No one even knows about it. Was Right Turn on Red. I'd heard it was my first bill.
Really?
Yes. So when you go Right Turn on Red, but I've heard about it in California. I said that's a great idea, and you have to stop first and make sure it's safe. But then you can go. And instead of waiting, gasoline, and you're impatient and all that. So I put Right Turn on Red, and I'm very proud of that bill because I think it changed people's lives and saves gas.
It did.
Yeah, in a significant way. So it's being a legislator and a public official, you have an impact on many people's lives. And local is it's a good place to be because you get to know everybody. The higher up you get, the more people you affect, but it's less personal.
Right.
Yeah.
Now tell me a little bit about what it was like to be around Ella Grasso, and again in this historical, a woman as a governor was groundbreaking.
Oh, definitely. And she was not, I don't know what people think about it because she's Mother Ella, and she's stomping through the snow.
Right.
And and she drove a very modest car. She wouldn't have one of these big black limousines. She was just an ordinary person, and people identified with her because she was very middle class in every way, but very unusual in many ways because she was really brilliant. She was very, very smart, but she didn't lord it over you. You wouldn't know that she was that smart. She just was, and but she was difficult. I mean, I wouldn't say she was an easy person to work for. When I did work for her, and I'd sometimes send her a memo thinking I did great, she'd say "so far" on it, little lead.
Oh,
And I thought she would have
tough.
big handwriting. I like handwriting analysis. I think you can learn a lot about handwriting in people. And when I first got her note, she was little tiny handwriting. I couldn't believe it because she was such a presence. I thought, God, she's got to write big.
Right.
And she didn't little. And I realized that, she was really, didn't have a big ego because she was always put down. She was an immigrant, child of immigrants, and she was always going to schools that she didn't quite belong. She didn't have the money. She went to Mount Holyoke. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she was always sort of struggling in a way to be accepted and to be as good as anybody. And she didn't talk about it, but I realized that how difficult it had to be for her when she was with all these rich kids and they didn't have any money. I think her father had a bake shop in Windsor, Windsor Locks. So I don't think she came across powerful, but inside she didn't have that
Modest.
sense. I didn't. Definitely she had to struggle, but she wasn't going to not do what she wanted to do because she had this sort of humble background, and I think it connected her to people. They had her washing her hair in the sink. You remember that one? Maybe you didn't, but she honestly they just that's and it was not a phony thing. She was a very ordinary person.
Yes, my recollection and in reading about her, it seems that she was a very modest yet very determined, headstrong woman.
Well, when she lost her mentor, when John Bailey died, he was really the person that paved the way for her and got her the governorship nomination and all that. When he died, then the guys decided to, they could run her, and she didn't. She had people she wanted to be her lieutenant governor. Usually the governor picks the lieutenant, and they wouldn't give her her choice, which had never happened before. So she was, and then she got furious, and she ran her own show. She just cut the state central committee out completely because, they got to know that you don't fool around.
You don't mess around.
No.
We're going to start wrapping things up here, but you mentioned this a little bit earlier. I would like to just touch on girls getting involved in politics, and I don't mean necessarily running for office, but I mean being an invested, contributing member of what is going on in the political landscape. What would you say to young girls today or moving forward about how important that is?
Well, I used to say to young people in general, not just to women, that you ought to pay attention to what we do because we affect your lives in a very, very personal way. I mean, how old you are when you can drink, when you can drive a car. I mean, we can control a lot of your life, and you ought to keep an eye on what we're doing because it does affect you personally. And I think the last election, I think President Obama gave a lot of credit to women for his re-election and Hispanics. I mean, we are powerful, and the more of us that vote, become more powerful. So I think you ignore us at your peril. That's what I'd say to people.
That is good advice.
So be alert and keep your eye on what goes on and vote. And you don't have to run for elective office.
Right.
It is not for everybody.
Right.
It is not. It's a difficult profession. It takes a lot of time. It's not particularly family friendly because you're going to meetings at night and you're raising money and you're marching in parades, and when everybody's having picnics, you're giving speeches at the gravesite on Memorial Day. Or, it's a very time consuming if you're going to be effective. And I didn't have a safe district. I mean, I was the first Democrat ever to be elected from Madison. It was so Republican, and there was no hope that I would ever get elected. So in order to stay elected, you have to stay in touch with your 12 towns. And, it takes a lot of time. Yeah.
Well, and that your passion for communication and language was certainly something that probably served you well at the time because that is so important for elected officials, at least I believe, in being successful. And I share your commitment to being involved in your government. I feel that that's a very important thing, and as a woman, as a mother, I feel that that's a very important piece of our responsibility in society, is to be involved in what happens in our communities. So thank you for
Right.
that.
Well, I think people don't realize how interesting it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not an ordeal or anything. I mean, the more you know, the more you admire or take advantage of what your community has to offer. It's a very good thing to do, and it's not onerous. I really want to say to people, it's quite a lot of fun. You meet interesting people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's all to the good.
Absolutely. Well, Betty, I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us your little snippet of how you have affected the state of Connecticut and the landscape for women, certainly. And we're so glad that you are a Simsbury resident and are part of our community.
Well, I've enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that wraps up this edition of The Simsbury Woman. You can find us on Facebook now. If you look up The Simsbury Woman, we do have a Facebook page. Please like us there, and we'll see you next month.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.